Blitz began, we've seen many different sides of Clinton. For those who thought they knew everything there was to know about Hillary Clinton, most recently, Alana Goodman, a reporter for the conservative website, the Washington Free Beacon, uncovered audio recordings of Clinton from the 1980s, including one clip of Clinton discussing a 1975 legal case in which she was the defense attorney, assigned to be the defense attorney, for a man charged with raping a 12-year-old girl. Take a listen.
He took a lie detector test. I had to take a polygraph. When she passed, which forever destroyed my faith in polygraphs. But you know what was sad about it was that the prosecutors had evidence, among which was his underwear. He had presented these underpants with a hole in it. I said, what kind of evidence is that? You know, you've got a pair of underpants with a hole in it. Of course, the crime lab had thrown away the piece that they cut out. It was really, I mean, I plea bargained it down because they didn't have any, it turned out they didn't have any evidence.
Let's bring in CNN senior political correspondent Brianna Keilar, CNN chief congressional correspondent Dana Bash, and CNN chief political analyst Gloria Borger. Brianna, I'll start with you. In the Washington Post, Melinda Henneberger says, quote, "This is not typical talk for a lifelong defender of women and children," and points out that in the affidavit, Clinton cast the victim as, quote, "emotionally unstable with a tendency to seek out older men and to engage in fantasizing." Now, I know she was doing her job. She had to defend this client. He's entitled to the best defense possible. It's, you know, she's not obviously responsible for that. But do you think this is politically a problem for her in any way?
I do. I think it's good lawyering, but I think it is bad politics. And I think it's really bad for a certain subset of voters, and that would be young people. You know, I've gone to certain events, and the people who are kind of coming out to see what she's about are, you know, for lack of a better term, the millennial generation. They're still actually being introduced to her. Fancy that in 2016, these are people who were born 1998 or slightly before, right? So you're talking about people who don't really identify with her as First Lady, probably not even as Senator, and they're still being introduced to her right now, and she's being branded to those folks as a champion of women and girls. And so I think when you have a group of people who don't have necessarily that depth of knowledge about her, and then you put something like this, and I do think the audio really changes it, where she's saying, he took a polygraph, and then she says that it forever, you know, destroyed her faith in polygraph.
Yeah.
She thought
she's admitting that he's guilty.
Right.
Yes.
I think it's a problem. I think it really pokes a hole in that narrative.
Now, Dana, we should point out, Clinton wrote about this in her own, her other autobiography, Living History, saying that it was shortly after this experience that Ann Henry, another woman, and I discussed setting up Arkansas's first rape hotline. She is somebody that has a track record of standing up for women, standing up for girls. But she's also a tough attorney.
A very tough attorney, and Brianna brought up the generational, perhaps, divide on this. And I think we should also look at it from the perspective of the fact that she was a young woman in a man's world in the South, and she was new to the area. She was assigned this case by a judge, and she felt that, even in objective articles, that she had no choice but to take it. The question then becomes, did she have a choice to go beyond that? And in the affidavit, what many will view as blaming the victim, going for the jugular in a way that a good attorney should do, to do whatever they can for their client. But when you're talking about something as incredibly sensitive and incredibly explosive as rape, especially when, as you say, it's not about being a lawyer, it's about being a politician, so much of this is going to depend on how she frames it now, how she discusses it, and whether she says, I was young, if I'm looking as my older self back at my younger self, I wouldn't have done it like that.
And we should point out that we reached out to the Team Clinton, and they did not have a comment on this.
Right, and I think, you know, to your point about your older self reaching out to your younger self, I remember the 70s. I understand where Hillary Clinton was, assigned, being asked to take this case for legal aid. And I also think, though, in listening to her with her Arkansas accent, I might add there, it gives us into a window into what she would do, how ambitious she was and how aggressive she was, and also what kind of a lawyer she was and how much she wanted to win this case. I mean, she took evidence with her to New York to
Not just evidence, it was a pair of underwear.
a pair of underwear,
To have
right?
the DNA
To
analyzed.
have the DNA analyzed. You know, this was somebody who was asked to take this case by a very powerful person and did her best on behalf of her client. And it gives you a sense of what she does, you know, how when she's got her eye on something and she wants to do something, she did everything she could.
The other thing, just quickly, that I'll point out is that I listened to that audio several times to try to get a sense of, you know, the buzz on it is that she's laughing about it. But I think I'm not so sure that's fair. It's almost like a nervous laughter about how, from her perspective, how inept the prosecution was, the fact that they were losing evidence and messing up evidence.
I don't think there's any question she was being a tough attorney.
Exactly.
But that just doesn't necessarily jibe with the narrative. Now, turning to another